You might be familiar with statistics like these. And 9 out of 10 startups don't make it. 20% of startups fall apart after a year. 30% of startups close within 2 years. 50% of startups shut their doors within 5 years. And 70% of startups dissolve within 10 years. Only 40% of startups are able to become profitable. Now, what if there's another way to ensure predictable success and scale? Our guest has put together just another way for founders and entrepreneurs, and we'll be exploring that in just a moment. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast brought to you by Sproutwith.com. I'm Vinay Koshi, and our guest is Gregory Shepard. Now, Gregory, you're a 20-year startup veteran and serial entrepreneur with 14 liquidity events under your belt, two of which were sold as part of a $925 million transaction that won 4 private equity awards for transactions between $250 million and $1 billion. You're a Forbes Books author, published in major publications, TEDx speaker and keynote speaker for universities and conferences worldwide. But you're also the host of the Forbes Radio Meet the Boss podcast. And perhaps more interestingly, you've co-founded Boss Capital Partners, which is a global syndicate for investing in tech startups. You've also co-founded Boss Startup Science with a learning center based on the University of San Diego's campus. The Boss Startup Science, or BOSS as it were, stands for Business Operating Support System, which is an open source methodology to empower entrepreneurs while increasing startup success rates. That's quite a glowing resume, Greg, and I'm just curious, was there a pivotal moment or experience that's been formative in being able to do what you do today? If so, what was it?
I think that, first of all, thank you for having me. And also, thank you for all of those. That was I listened to you saying all those things about me. And I'm like, wow. Oh, wait a minute. I think I have dyslexia and autism, and I'm what they call a savant. And I think that growing up with everything being really hard puts you in a situation where you don't know anything but everything being
Mm,
hard for you. So this is the first time I ever talked about it like this, that I'm used to things being really hard. So when things aren't hard, I'm uncomfortable. So I tend to constantly have this insatiable appetite for
mhm,
achievement, but not just achievement in easy things, but sometimes the most difficult things. Like I swam a marathon, I've run a marathon, I rode a bicycle from San Francisco to LA. So I do things that I think are impossible, and then I achieve them to prove to myself that I can do the impossible. So I think that's part of it. And then also I'm very organized and manage my time really carefully. So I think that, I think that helps.
And I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
So I see my savant specialty, we call it a
Mhm.
superpower, is pattern
Right.
recognition. The businesses that I've built in the past, including startup science, which I'm doing now, is all based off of seeing patterns. So when you were talking about the
Mhm.
failure rate, so I did a research project started in 2016. I spent like $500,000, hired 5 people to learn why, when, and how founders fail. And then when I was looking at the data, I found all these
Mm.
patterns. And then I created startup science based on trying to eliminate the failure rate or drop it by 10% as my goal. So the pattern recognition allows me to see, it's hard to explain to people that aren't familiar with neurodivergent conditions, but I see lines and colors and shapes that tell me that there's something there. And then I dig in. And once I understand the patterns and the threads of the patterns, then I see, and because they always reveal problems or opportunities. And I see these businesses and then I build based off of
Right.
that. And the same thing when I'm in making
Mhm.
investments. There's a lot of people that see patterns, right? So I see other patterns and I look at them and I go, okay, this person's onto something.
Brilliant. I'm curious though, in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
I think that there is oftentimes an overemphasis on growth, usually pushed down from
Mhm.
the investors, which is the bad decisions is the first reason why the majority of them fail, and that becomes from primarily bad advice. And the first level of bad advice comes from investors, actually. And so the investors will say, we need you to grow and this sort of thing, but not standardizing and optimizing before growth in terms of the stages you go through in the life cycle is a fundamental mistake. And I'll explain why. If typically a company will spend 33% of the first year's wages of a new employee before they get to 75% productivity. So if you're hiring 5 people and you're paying 100 grand each, you're looking at $33,000
Mm.
per person, or 33,000 whatever currency, right, per person. So if you're doing that and you haven't standardized, then you have this cost, and a lot of companies actually put themselves out of business by growing, or they do that by raising money, overvaluing, and then the investors walk away because it's overvalued and there isn't enough margin for them to make money. So there's two things that I think they're missing. The first thing is you need to standardize before you go into growth. You need to figure out what your processes are, how they work, how efficient they can be, and how much more efficient you can make them. Then you optimize based on the standards that you did, and then you go into growth. Because if you do it
Yeah.
that way, you're helping yourself when you grow versus hurting yourself when you grow if you don't do it that way. The other thing that I think that they're missing is, companies buy other companies to either make or save money. That's like a
Mm.
synergy, right? So the majority of the acquisitions that happen in a bull market are making money, and the majority of acquisitions that happen in a bear market are saving money. Acquisitions even by a customer or by an
Mm.
acquirer. So turning your business towards whatever's going on in the market at that time is favorable, because when you're in a recession and you're trying to sell them to make money and nobody's spending money, nobody's going to listen to you. But if you go in and say and change the way you're pitching your product to, hey, you're going to save money, then people will
Mm.
listen to you. Now, the same thing, the same idea of understanding people buy products to make or save money and synergies for an acquirer makes sense. So I'll come back to that. Acquirers have usually a huge list of customers. They have a giant list of customers, and they're selling products to those customers. And they have a customer acquisition cost to a lifetime value ratio, right? Now, if they've already got tens of thousands of customers that they've already paid for, they've already absorbed that customer acquisition cost, then it makes sense for them to grow their lifetime value. How do they do that? They buy other products to sell to the same customers. So a lot of founders make this really big mistake where in the very beginning of their business, they're not thinking about their exit strategy. And because of that, they're spending money and they're growing like the investors tell them. And maybe the customers that they're obtaining don't have what we call attachment rate, which means they're not the same customer as the acquirer has. When you get all the way down to an exit and you get to that point and the acquirer's like, yeah, there's no customer match. Why would I buy your company to sell your product to my customers when you don't have a product to sell to my customers? Go walk away. So it's really important at the very beginning that you understand who your acquirers are and what their customers are. Just like you do your own ideal customer
Mhm.
profile and your own persona, you need to match yours with theirs. So think about it this way. You would never build a business without having a customer. Why would you build a business to sell to an acquirer if you didn't already know who the acquirer is and what they
Mm.
wanted, right? Like it doesn't make any sense because basically your whole business is just a product to your acquirer. And all the customers and all the revenue that you pick up is just validation that customers are going to buy it. And those customers need to match your acquirer. Otherwise, it's
Mm.
nonsense for them. So that generation of mistakes is something that occurs. It occurs so much of the time that it's got to be in the 90s, the 90 percentile or more. It even happened to me. I built a business. I had an exit lined up, went to the acquirer. They said to me, 50% of these customers meet our attachment rate requirements and the other 50 don't. So we're not going to get money for the other 50 because we're just going to terminate. And so that was half of my
Mm.
valuation, right? So I was like, no, thank you. And I had to go back to the drawing board 5 years later, come back and try to sell it to them. There's a fundamental mistake that you can't fix easily at all. And you have to understand that you've raised money to acquire those wrong customers. You've taken dilution on your cap table for those wrong customers. You've spent time, you've built processes, you've built sales strategies and brand and everything around that. And if you've done it wrong, you're going to go backwards. So you can't do that at the time of the exit. You have to do that from the very beginning. That is the most fundamental mistake that I see repeated over and over and over again. And I cannot believe the number of investors that I talk to that, or founders that I talk to that just get pushed into growth without taking the proper steps or without validating their exit strategy from the very beginning. They just go, just grow and that sort of stuff. And it's one of the reasons why 9 out of 10
Mm.
fail. It's because of that. It's a high reason. Me, if I were to give founders advice, I would say, like, the first thing you need to do is you need to establish who your customer is and what their persona is. And then you need to make sure that matches up with your
Mm.
acquirers. And the other thing is that you have to remember that when you go into your exit strategy, there might be like 5 acquirers and 100 startups trying to be sold to those
Yeah.
5 acquirers. So like that old game musical chairs, somebody's left standing, right? Because there's only 5 and they're only
Mm.
going to buy one. So it's the customer match and stuff like that helps you get aligned with those acquirers early on. In fact, I tell founders and even myself, I go out and get their customers to be my customers,
Right.
to empirically prove that look, your customers are buying my product. I go that far
Mhm.
with it. So that would be like the major advice I would give to founders in terms of think about this like
Mhm.
now.
That's a very interesting perspective. Is there more to dating acquirers are very much in line with the ICP than meets the eye? Is it just a matter of filling out your ICP and picking potential acquirers? The step that you mentioned of actually going out to acquire the acquirers' customers is certainly goes a step further in terms of validation. But is there anything else that we should consider in order to ensure that we're nicely matched up?
Yeah. So what I do when I create this exit
Mhm.
strategy at the very beginning is I figure out who my acquirers are. And the way I do that is I go into one of these databases, Startup Science.
Mhm.
Our platform actually will give you your
Right.
acquirers and they give you all the data. And what I mean by the data is it shows you what they've bought and what they haven't bought. So you can sometimes see like a hole
Mhm.
in their strategy. So if you're creative, you can look at it and you can see, oh, they bought this company. That's a marketing company. Oh, they bought this company. That's a services company. Oh, they bought this company. That's a logistics company. And you could start to see them putting together all the pieces to wrap up a little ecosystem, what we call a
Mhm.
walled garden, right? To create a walled garden. And if you start to see them create a walled garden, but that there's a few pieces missing, and you're like, hey, I'm one of those pieces, then
Mhm.
there you go. Right now, you've got, they have a home for it. You can also see in the data how much they paid for these acquisitions and all kinds of other components. And so you can kind of put together, it looks like they're paying top line 10x. Their price ranges are between 20 and 30 million or 150 million to 250 million, whatever it is. And they're looking for a logistics company that handles, I don't know, transportation logistics or something like that, because they have these pieces, but they're missing this. And then now you have an exit, right? So you're like, okay, and you find 5 of those, at least 3 to 5, at least I usually say 5 because of the musical
Mhm.
chair thing I brought up earlier. And then I go, okay, now let me look at their customer base. Who are their customers? Who are they selling to? So then I go, oh, okay, this is the customer. And then I create an ICP, an ideal customer profile, and a persona. So the ICP is the company and the persona is the person you're talking
Mhm.
to. And it's really important that you make sure they're different because a lot of times something's good for the company is not good for the persona and they won't buy it, even though it's good for the company they work. It may put them out of business or create hassles or change management is a nightmare or
Mhm.
whatever it is. So then I look at the ICP and persona of the acquirer and I see an attachment. I could see that the same customers they have are the same customers that I'm going after. Then I go find their customers and then I try to pitch them and then I go after them. And then when I acquire those customers, now I can say, what I do is I create a simulated attachment rate. So let's say they have 100,000 customers. I may take 100 customers and then I'll track this and I'll say I've got 100 of your customers. I've sold 20% of those customers. So I have a 20% attachment rate. That helps you with your valuation when it comes to the exit, right? Because you can say you have 100,000 customers, 20% of those customers, 20,000 customers are going to buy my product because I've already run a test. So minimum of 20,000. Now, each one of those customers are going to spend this much. So you can see what the top end is, the blue ocean premium is if you buy the company. Now, I'm not asking for all that money. I'm just asking for maybe 50% of that money. And I'll even put it in an earnout. And then you can add a premium on top of your exit.
Brilliant. Lots of nuggets there. Thank you for sharing that. Gregory, you talked about the fact that you hired a few people to help you back in 2016 work through the data and start to create startup science to what it is today. I remember in our earlier conversation, you took issue with a lot of the data that's out there. Could you help us revisit that and explain what the issue is and how you've sorted the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, and in order to be able to distill the correct insights?
I wrote a book about all this stuff too. It comes out in September. It's called Startup Science, the Life Cycle. So all the stuff is in there just so people know, because I didn't want to keep it a secret. I wanted to help as many people as I can. That's why I created the platform. But then there's the platform just teaches them like in 7 minutes, but the book is like thorough. But anyway, the things that I learned is that like when you look at the traditional data out there on why founders fail, things like ran out of money or bad team or that sort of stuff, right? And they're big chunks. And it's wrong because it ran out of money. Why? Why did you run out of money? You can't just say ran out of money, right? Why did you run out of money? That's not an answer. That's a question, right? So ran out of money. And then you find out we ran out of money because we were overvalued. And we ran out of money because we burned through the money and didn't attribute it to the areas we told the investors we were going to attribute the money to. So the attribution of the use of funds is what they call it in the docs, right? So then the other one would be, we told the investors that we were going to reach certain goals and we didn't reach those goals. Or another one is we failed to validate a certain phase of the life cycle that we were in. So we failed to validate the product or get to our MVP or validate the vision or whatever kind of round you're after at that stage. The data that's out there they're questions. They're not answers. Bad team. Why did you have a bad team? And how did that happen? And when did you find out? And what did you do when you found out you had a bad team? Because the demise of a company is not as simple as ran out of money. That is the ultimate lagging indicator. And that actually started probably a year earlier. So what I wanted to do was learn, where did this originate? And what was the path that it went through before it ended up at the stage that all these reports come out saying that they failed at? It's just so every time I look at those things or people bring them up to me, I'm like, oh my God, really? This is ridiculous. You don't look at a professional athlete and say, oh, they lost the game, right? There's always the data behind it. They lost the game because of, and then the pundits are out there talking about it for 45 minutes. And that's what led to the loss. And so in startups, when they just say, oh, they failed because they ran out of money, to me, that is just a huge misleading statement to make, because it makes founders think, oh, I need to raise more money. And raising money is the outcome of something. It's not a result. Your goal is not to raise money. Your goal is to build a good business, and in such a way that your investors come to you and you don't have to come to them. Just like if you build a good product, you introduce the customer to the product and they buy it. You don't have to sell it. Look at Apple. Apple runs lifestyle commercials. That's it. People use an Apple phone, and from the very beginning, they use a phone and they're like, oh, I love this. And then that's it. They're done. They just introduce them to it. So all their commercials are lifestyle commercials to introduce the phone to them once they or whatever the device is. And once they use it, they're like, this is amazing. That is how you're supposed to raise money. And that is how you're supposed to sell products and services.
Very interesting. And with the raising money, a lot of investors are very much focused on this idea of growth. How would you suggest that we find the right sorts of investors, ones that are actually more aligned with our overall objectives?
I think that it's really important that people understand there's a thesis, right? So every investor, they have a thesis. Their thesis is when they go out and raise money for a fund, they go to a bunch of LPs or individual investors, and they go to them and they say, we are raising money for these types of companies at these stage that have these attributes. And that's
Mhm.
their thesis, like requirements, right? So if you're out there trying to raise money and you don't understand the thesis of the investor, you could be just doing pitch after pitch, sending emails and wasting your time because, and the thesis can
Mm.
change, right? So in fund one, the thesis could be sustainability, not environment, sustainability. Environment is cleaning up the damage, and sustainability is the future of preventing the damage from happening anymore. So let's say it's sustainability, but focused on
Mm.
climate, not water, not soil or wildlife conservation, whatever, right? They're focused on the carbon emissions, right? Now you understand they're interested in environment, they're interested in carbon, and then there's another level to it, which is it carbon coming out of vehicles? Is it carbon coming out of energy plants? Is it carbon coming out of manufacturing? So they have to figure out what it is. And then, and only then, do you know if that investor is the right investor you should be talking to. Everything else is a waste of
Mm.
time. They'll even take your calls and look at it because they want to know what's going on in the space in case fund two comes
Yeah.
up. So they're learning from the founders that are out there to understand what fund two should be during fund one. But that's a waste of your time as an entrepreneur because you're trying to raise cash for what you
Mhm.
have right now. So it's really important that you understand their thesis, like massively important that you understand their thesis. And it's always on their website most of the time, or you can just
Yeah.
ask them, what's your investment thesis? Most of the time it's on their website where the investors go.
Right. Another great insight there. There's a lot of conversation around value creation in running a business and even in being able to acquire customers, etc. I was wondering, could you elaborate on that in terms of how you view value creation within the company?
Yeah, there's two life cycles. There's the innovation life cycle and there's a startup life cycle. The innovation life cycle is made up into two big pieces. So you have value creation, which is your vision and your
Mm.
product phase, right? And that those two phases take a long time. It's 6 months for the vision phase and 24 months for the product phase. Typically, the whole cycle is
Mhm.
like 5 years. So in that first cycle, so it's like 2.5 years, sometimes 3 years, you're in the value creation, meaning value is
Mm.
just money, right? So money creation, right? So you're trying to build the ability to get money. And then when you go into go to market, you start to transition from value creation to value capture. So now capturing money. This is where you actually start earning money. And those phases include go to market. So that it goes vision and then product, and then it goes go to market. And the go to market doesn't
Mhm.
mean growth. That means go to market. Everybody always thinks that that means growth. It's not the same. It means you're going to market to get
Mm.
ready to grow. So you go to market, standardization, optimization, then growth, and then exit. And the cycle takes about 5 years. And like I said earlier, you have to do standardization and optimization before you hit growth. Growth is when you're like hitting the pedal to the metal. You're raising big money and you're just slamming into
Mm.
growth, right? So you're going full bore. So when if you think about it, if you're driving a car and you don't have the right suspension and you don't have the right motor and the right tires and you're not on the right road and you hit the pedal to the metal, either the car's going to blow up, you're going to lose control, or you're going to hit a corner and hit a tree and boom, it's over. So what standardization does is it's where you go through the vehicle and you make sure everything is running, where you practice the drive, where you look at where you're going and do all of that. Now you've documented it. Then you go into optimization, which is where you look at what you standardized and see if there's a way to do it better, faster, more efficiently with less risk. And then you go into
Mm.
growth. See, so it's ready, aim, fire instead of ready, fire, aim, which is what a lot of people
Sure,
do.
sure. You've broken this down into what I would call steps that need to be taken one after the other. Given the nature of the market today, where things are evolving at such a fast pace, would you say that a linear type of sort of steps or phases is still the appropriate process to follow, or should we have an element of standardization and process development even while growing?
You're constantly
Right.
optimizing and you're constantly standardizing. Like you're
Right.
always doing that because as you grow, new
Mhm.
things come up, right? Because maybe when you start growing, you have one person in charge of the functional area for sales and marketing. And then now you've got the VP and they've got two directors underneath them, one for sales and one for marketing. And then later on, now you've got underneath each one of sales and marketing, you have people that are
Mm.
managers. And then underneath that, you have team leaders. And so the best practice is the standardization and the optimization happens continuously. But you want to make sure that you get the basics down before you start growing so that you can grow into
Mhm.
those things without having problems. So you think about that ahead of time,
Right.
right? So what I mean in more detail with standardization is each functional area. So there's four functional areas in every business, and that's sales and marketing, shared services. That's like IT, HR, stuff like that, finance. And that they're all the shared services. And then you have product and engineering, and then you have service and support. Those four functional areas are tied to things that are valuation drivers, the things that create valuation. And valuation drivers are always growth, margin, and retention. So growth goes with sales and marketing, retention goes with support and service, and margin goes with shared services, and product and engineering
Mhm.
spans all of them. Now, after that, you start to put in KPIs, leading and lagging KPIs. KPIs are things that drive financial numbers. Financial KPIs are lagging KPIs. And each one of those are basically aligned with the balance with the profit and loss. There's expense KPIs and income KPIs. Once you do that, you're doing that all through standardization. You have the structure already built. When you start to grow into things, you already have a plan to start funneling in, to start
Mhm.
backfilling the stack that you've built and the KPIs that they need to live up to and everything. So you're doing all that ahead of time because otherwise it's like driving down the road at like 100 and trying to change the tires at
Mhm.
the same time, right? I've done that and many founders do all the time, and it is a disaster. And so you want to get it all lined up ahead of time so that you've already got those tires
Mm.
on the car.
Yeah.
You're not trying to change them while you're going between 50
Mhm.
and 100.
This idea of using leading KPIs is interesting. A lot of the conversations tend to involve indicators that, at least in my opinion, are lagging indicators. How would you suggest
Mhm.
we think about and find leading indicators so we can actually take corrective action before the problem arises, as opposed to after it's occurred and perhaps a bit too late in some circumstances?
Yeah, I can tell you that I'll tell you the analogy I use for people that they think this is funny. So if you have kids and one of your kids comes up and yells, it screams, so and so hit me or whatever. And then the next thing you ask is, what happened right before that?
Yeah.
The kid didn't just hit you for no reason, right? So what happened right? Did you take his toy? What did you do? That's the
Mhm.
leading indicator. If you look at your business and you say, in this business, I have my sales numbers, let's say your number of sales, where do the sales come from? They come from what's right before that, right? Demos. What's right before that? Lead call, discovery calls. What's right before that? A lead. What's right before that? Marketing. So now what in marketing is right before that? That has to do with the marketing qualified lead or sales qualified. What's before that? A marketing qualified lead. What's before that? Those are all leading
Mhm.
indicators, right? Your KPIs are the things that lead up to the sales numbers. Those things are your
Mhm.
KPIs, right? Because what you're saying is you're saying, if I judge my business based on my sales numbers, that happened 6 months ago, maybe a
Mhm.
year ago. It's like driving, looking at behind you, looking at your rear mirror, right? You're gonna crash because you're not looking where you're going. But if you start by saying and running it through and saying, if I do run these ads, I'm gonna get this many clicks. If I get this many clicks, I'm gonna get this many
Mhm.
conversions. I get this many conversions, I'm going to get this many leads. Out of those leads should equal this many discovery calls, which should issue this many demos, which should issue this many contracts, which should issue the revenue. The things that lead up to it are the leading indicators. If you focus on
Mhm.
those, then you will win. A lot of people focus the other way around. And another analogy I use, it's like getting on a scale and saying, oh, I'm fat. And then that's it. But what led up to that? I was eating crappy food, I didn't exercise, whatever it is. So a lot of people don't realize that if you pay attention to what you're eating and you pay attention to exercising, the scale will
True.
move. It's the same with a business. You don't pay attention to the lagging indicators. They're by the time you see them, it's too late, right? So you pay attention to what creates that and you focus on those and only those, right? And then the rest, that's what I mean by money and success and customers and all these things. It's an outcome of a previous process. It's not something you focus on. It's the outcome of something you're focusing.
Mm, brilliant. Now, I'm sure we've talked about some elements of the startup science and boss methodology. Are there, you're right.
Sorry.
Are there other elements that we should be aware of as we look at getting the help that we need to ensure that we can build our businesses predictably?
Yeah, I think that the stack I use is your valuation
Mhm,
drivers are on the top, and then underneath your valuation drivers are your lagging indicators. And then underneath your lagging indicators are your leading indicators. All of those things. So your leading indicators create your financial numbers create your
mhm,
valuation, right? So if you're focusing on your leading indicators effectively, it's like a time machine. You're like looking at the changes that are going to happen to your valuation by focusing on the things that are going to change them
mhm,
earlier, right? And so that's how I do it. When I look at my portfolio companies or even my companies, I don't even look at the financials. I don't even care about them because it's too late. It's gone, right? It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what's creating the next set of
mhm,
financials. So I'll look at my financials like every 3 months because it's all past data. And I'm focusing on what I'm doing to change the numbers, not on what the
yeah,
numbers are right now. And I think that's like a fundamental problem that I see with founders all the time is that because the investors want to look at the
mm,
financials. If you drive your business like that, you're driving
mm,
backwards. It's just, so I always tell people, what are your valuation drivers? Growth, margin, and retention. What changes those numbers? Functional areas. Which functional areas? Growth, sales, and marketing. Okay. What does that waterfall look like? There's awareness, getting the customers familiar with what your product is. And then there's demand generation that creates the demand. The demand is usually some set of emails or lists of customers that then you
mm,
nurture with more content. Once those things are scored to a certain level, then it drops into a sales qualified lead and then a salesperson follows up. So follow the journey and put your KPIs aligned with the major junctions of the journey. And then if you run your business that way, you will see things before the disaster happens. You'll be able to make corrections way
mhm.
ahead of time.
Right. And I'm also curious with this idea of altruistic capitalism. For those of us who are keen on exploring this some more, how would you suggest we integrate intrinsic and extrinsic motivations to achieve altruistic outcomes through capitalism?
Yeah, the whole idea, I wrote that thing in I think it was 2016 or 2015 or something for Forbes. And the idea was to use the incredible power of
Mhm,
capitalism for altruistic outcomes. And what I mean by that is that just imagine that if the population was to really endorse uh, sun powered energy, solar energy, right? And everybody was like, holy crap, if I can get sun powered energy, it's going to reduce carbon emissions. My bill's going to go down and all of these things are going to happen. Then you use the power of capitalism to put that in place. And the outcome is
mhm,
altruistic. The outcome is less damage to the environment. People have less smaller bills, so on and so forth. This to me is the basis of altruistic capitalism. So in my situation with startup science, our goal is to try to reduce the failure rate with founders. We created this huge platform with education and all this stuff, everything a founder needs in one big platform. And that's the altruistic outcome is more founders are successful funding companies and helping companies that are doing things for sustainability, inclusion, environment, and many other
mm,
things. And the investors are investing in those businesses because they're going to be selling products and services. So you can see the capitalistic side funding or supporting the side of the founders, which are at the end doing altruistic
oh,
things. And my whole model is the same way, right? We are a for profit company, but we're making money by helping founders solve problems that we have in the world. So that is the model of altruistic capitalism. The easiest thing to do is that traditionally speaking, you're either finding a problem or an opportunity as an entrepreneur. If you find problems if you solve those problems, the end result of that is going to be some altruistic outcome, helping people, helping the environment, helping the
mm,
wildlife, something, right? some sort of problem that's worth it, then I think of it as the universe is your tailwind. If you're not doing that, then the universe is your headwind.
Yeah.
So a headwind and a tailwind all has to do with where you're pointing your sails. So point your sails in a direction where it's going to move you forward.
Right.
And especially in the environment that we're in right now, you look at people that are out there trying to make money, the investors, the customers, everybody sees it. It's so transparent. But if you look at people that are actually trying to help in some
Mm.
way, you automatically have a tailwind just in the conversation, right? And so my advice to people is you don't just try to solve a problem, try to solve a problem with the wind at your back. And that's going to be where you are appealing and taking the moral frame when you're talking to somebody and saying, hey, listen, yeah, I'm making money, but I'm doing it by solving problems that you and I both experience and our kids will
Mm.
experience also. And by doing that, you're solving problems and you're creating some automatic momentum just through the force of the wind, the tailwind. When you look at right now, the environment, I was at this conference in Montreal and there was like 170 of wealthy family, the wealthiest families there. And these people were trying to put together a trillion US uh, towards solving environmental
Mm.
issues. If that isn't a tailwind, I
Mm.
don't know what is, right? That is a tailwind. And it shows you that there's money in altruistic capitalism.
Very interesting. Could you expand on how altruistic capitalism empowers communities to solve their own problems?
Yeah, I think that like when you look at sorry, we have coyotes running around.
You're right.
Yeah, and he's just losing his mind. The way you think about it is that the people that are experiencing the problem are the subject matter experts
Mhm.
of the problem. So when you look at two types of founders, you have visionary founders who look from the outside in from 30,000 feet. You have subject matter experts who look from the inside out, right inside at ground zero. If you are somebody who is experiencing discrimination, but better than people that are looking from the outside. If you are somebody that has a hard time getting running water, you're experiencing that more than anybody else. So you have two things that benefit you as a founder. One, you have
Mm.
drive. You have something that you really want to fix, right? So you have the ability to stick with it, even though you take a beating when you're a founder. And the other thing you have is deep in the detail knowledge about the problem. And the more you know about the problem, the better you can create a
Mm.
solution. Steve Jobs said one time, if you are 90% to the problem, understanding the problem, then you're 100% to the solution, and
Mm.
that's a product. So the whole thing when you're a founder is learning the problem as deeply and intimately as humanly possible so that you can solve it. Well, who better knows about social problems than the people that are experiencing
Yeah.
those social problems? Right? So they are the best founders. That's why we sponsor so many
Mm.
nonprofits because the universities, we power the universities, economic development, all this stuff. And what is you see universities, you have to have money to get into a university or get a
Yeah.
grant, right? But you have to have gone to a school that's worthy of it, of getting you the grades from a school that's justifies the university letting you in on a grant. Those schools aren't prevalent for people that don't
Mm.
have any money. So university's out of the question. So you have these nonprofits that are trying to get that inclusion that we hear about all the time and bring those people in. Those people are the best people to solve the problems that they've
Mm.
experienced. So they're incredible founders because they have the deep knowledge and expertise about the problem, like we
Yeah.
talked about earlier,
Yep.
you know?
Absolutely. Another question: how can the integration of personal narratives and ethical business practices drive not just revenue growth, but also sustainable, impactful growth within B2B tech companies?
I think that consistent, persistent
Mhm.
problems also create predictable and probable businesses. And predictable and probable businesses are what people want to
Mhm.
invest in, right? If you think that you have a probability of success of 90% and it's predictable that this success is going to happen over the next 5 years in this kind of a way, you have a business that people will invest in. So if the problem is persistent and consistent, then you can create predictability and probability. So I think that By engaging in those types of businesses, you automatically get what
Mm.
you need. And now you have something that will go on for a long time.
And given all that you've studied and experienced in your years in the startup space and tech space as well, would you say that there are a couple of areas around this idea of startup science that doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
I think that the first thing is that for the last 30
Hmm.
years, founders have been failing at a 90% rate in early stage, right? For 30 years, like name another industry that that something is failing 90% of the time and nobody does anything
Mm.
to fix it for 30 years. It doesn't exist, right? Look across technology, look across pharma, look across education,
Mm.
everywhere, right? So I think that the idea that our future is created by startups, because you think these corporates, they don't have R&D, they outsource that to accelerators now, right? The founders, these creators, they are creating our literally creating our future. Look at the software we're doing this podcast on, and the mic I'm talking to, and the computer that's powering, and the phone and the headphones. They all came
Mm.
from startups, right? Everything, the Tesla that changed everything, the iPhone that changed. It's all founders, right? Jeff Bezos and Amazon that's putting all the big box. It's all founders. So they're creating the future. So why aren't we putting more focus into helping them? They're failing at
Mm.
90%. That's why I did this. I was just like, this is just craziness. I can't believe that nobody is like standing on top of a building going, what are we doing? This is insanity. We have to to create a better way to do this.
And just to be clear for listeners, is startup science, is this primarily for people who are involved in the tech space and have a product per se, or is it a bit broader than that?
It's for all founders. We try to make it really neutral. The only thing that is a little off would be like pharma, because pharma has such a long
Hmm.
process to go through. We have like thousands of founders across the board, tech and everything else, but now 80% of
Hmm.
everything is tech. There's a component
Yep.
of tech in
Yeah.
pretty much everything these. But yeah, we power all those. The startup science platform is private labeled for accelerators, incubators, universities, all the startup assistance programs. If the founder is listening, then you go to gregoryshepard.com and click on visionaries and you can join that way. It's
Okay.
free.
Yeah.
So that's one way to do it. I don't know if you can put it in your show notes or something, but that's one way to do it. If you're an incubator or an accelerator or a visa program, economic development, or some sort of a startup assistance program, then you go to startup science and then we power those. So my gift to the founders is the one on Gregory Shepard, the Visionaries
Okay.
platform. That's like my way of saying, hey, just jump in. It's free.
That's you.
When so if you don't have any money, which these
Yep.
people that were the inclusion folk we're talking about, they don't have any money like the way I grew up. We're trying to give these people a little springboard
Right.
into foundership.
And the other question, of course, is this applicable to people worldwide, or is it predominantly US focused?
No, it's worldwide. We have platforms in Israel and all over Europe and the UK, and now we're starting to get some activated in Mexico, and it's in English right now, but it's changing to be every language.
Hmm.
When you come in, you'll choose a language and then it'll change everything to your native language. We power indigenous reservations. We even power systems for people that were put in prison for nonviolent
Hmm.
crimes. Maybe they had some weed and then they got a felony for weed, which is ridiculous. And so they can't get a job. And so we're teaching them how to be founders, and they're focusing on
Hmm.
cannabis, cannabis as an example, right? Because they're familiar with it, or they're focusing on prison re-education programs to help people get back into society after being
Hmm.
locked up. And these are all nonviolent crimes, right? So these people didn't they were just trying to survive. Most of them were poor and they were trying to survive and they made a mistake. And most of those mistakes happened when they were
Mm.
really young. They went to a party, they drove home, they had some weed in their pocket, they got arrested, and now their life is destroyed. So we give them another chance. So it's good for everybody. And the idea is that it's good for
Mhm.
everybody.
Brilliant. To wrap up, Gregory, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I would say starting with the end in mind, starting
Mm.
with your exit if you're a founder. Like It's so important. I can't even tell people. I try to tell people so many times. I'm like, this is so important. And most of the time they
Mm.
don't listen. And I see them go out of business. And it's just heartbreaking. It's just, I told you. So that would be the takeaway I would. It's a
Right.
good question too, by the way. That would be what I would tell everybody.
No worries. Greg, we'll include links that you mentioned in the show notes. But just to recap, for listeners who are curious, want to find out more, connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
GregoryShepard.com.
Okay.
So it's GregoryShepard.
Okay. We'll add that to the show notes. Gregory, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Listen, man, you're helping too, right? You're out here talking to people and helping them understand the world they're in, and you deserve a lot of credit for what you're doing. So I appreciate you.